In this session, we're going to talk about passing tests. I'll explain what that means, where the tests are coming from, and how you can pass with flying colors so you can experience more of what you want. My name is Jakob Smart. In case you're not yet familiar with who I am, or if this is your first time listening, I'm the founder of You Supercharge and the creator of the NQA modality that stands for Neuro Quantum Activation. High-performing athletes and entrepreneurs come to us when they're ready to break through to their next level and feel more alive than they have in a long, long time. Recognizing and passing tests is a big part of NQA and the M phase of what we call the PRIME protocol. A funny thing sometimes happens when people decide to go to their next level. You may have experienced this yourself. There's typically some initial excitement, maybe even some newfound momentum, and then a test or multiple tests will come along. Sometimes we have time to recognize a test for what it is and take our time when responding. Other times it's more of a pop quiz that happens in the spur of the moment and is tough to recognize unless you already have heightened awareness. These tests come along to see if we're truly committed to making the change we said we want. And they're there to test your level of commitment and congruence to having achieved your goal. Let me give you some examples. So let's say your commitment is to hitting a higher income level and only working with premium clients who you enjoy working with in your business. That's what excites you, and on a conscious level, you say that that's what you really want. Now, a potential client comes along. And at first glance, it looks like they may be one of those premium clients that you really want to work with, so you start getting even more excited. But it turns out they're pinching pennies, they're not a great fit, and they want to pay you for a much lower price service that would require a lot of your time and effort. A service that's comparable to a service that you used to offer back in the day and used to be happy getting paid to do. It just so happens that this potential client is ready to send you money and sign up right away. What do? From the outside, it can be easy to see this as a quote-unquote test, but in the moment, it sure is tempting to say yes, huh? After all, you could use the money, and it's not even that bad to fulfill that service. It's something that used to be fun to you, after all, and you used to be thrilled getting paid that amount for doing that activity. Here's the thing. If you say yes and take on that client, guess what? You failed the test. Now, there's nothing to feel bad or ashamed about if that's the case. It just means that you failed the test, objectively speaking, and that it's a setback to you learning the lesson that you're supposed to learn and you breaking through the next level and experiencing the goal that you said you had committed to earlier. Now, if you realize this after the fact, and this is where the power of reflection is so important, having a process, having protocols for reflecting and learning lessons and shortening feedback loops, big part of what we talk about within QA. So if you realize this after the fact, and then you recommit to the goal, the intention, and you start moving back on track, chances are you'll start building that positive momentum again, and chances are you'll have a similar test, maybe in a different form, come up sooner rather than later. Now, if you fail that test again, guess what? The cycle tends to repeat itself until you either pass the test and move on where that doesn't show up anymore, or you give up on the goal entirely. Now, let's say in the situation that we're talking about that you passed the test and you said no, but thank you to that potential client. Does that mean that all of a sudden what you want to experience, your goal, is going to happen right away and you won't come across any more tests on that path? Not necessarily. It could happen sooner rather than later, but that doesn't really mean that you're not going to have more tests, more opportunities to grow along that path. And what's most important, it's not whether or not you have more tests coming along on the way to you hitting that goal. What's most important is that based on your decision, you've reaffirmed your new commitment and you've reaffirmed your path that you're heading on to yourself. And you'll likely, because you've quote unquote passed the test in this situation, you'll likely start seeing even more breadcrumbs of positive momentum coming in, possibly even some huge wins happening almost immediately. It's like you're rewarded for passing the test. Now, whenever we're presented with a test, Typically, it's when we're in a transition between two energy fields, okay? The way that I like to think about it is think of it like swimming pools at a water park. Have you ever seen pictures of a water park? Maybe you've been to a water park yourself where they have a bunch of these swimming pools right next to each other, okay? Now, let's say there are two different swimming pools at the water park that are really close to each other, okay? And let's say you started in the middle of one of the swimming pools, right in the smack dab middle of that pool, and now you've moved your body, you've swam to where you've gotten out of the water to where you only have your toe in the water of that original pool, and the rest of your body, you're getting ready to walk on over to the other pool that's not too far away. Okay? So imagine that. And when you pass the test, what happens from an energy field level is that toe gets out of the water, and now you are on the way to that pool. Okay, you were on the path there. Now let's say you failed the test. At that point, it's sort of like you're thrown right back into the water of that original pool, and then the cycle continues until the cycle stops repeating itself until you pass the test, and then it doesn't happen again. Now, these tests, believe it or not, okay, as challenging as it sounds, they're a great thing. It means you are on track. It means you are on the path to a goal, to a different outcome if you're experiencing these tests. Okay, it means that you're shifting into a different energy field where what you want is prevalent. These tests, believe it or not, also come from you. That's right, they come from you. They come from a version of you. Okay, we call that in NQA your lower self. Your lower self is the part of you that wants to keep things the same. Okay, and that's for safety purposes because your lower self loves safety and stability and hates newness. Okay. Your lower self is also the part of you that's addicted to and lives off lower energy frequencies. Okay. And if you look at the map of consciousness, which we talk about a lot in NQA, it's one of the key frameworks, there are lower energies that calibrate below 200. And for some people, slightly higher, depending on where their baseline is. There are lower energies, things like fear, shame, guilt, desperation, anger, even pride, that calibrate below 200. And so your lower self brings up these tests as a trick for trying to get control and run the show. Okay? And as a trick for feeding you more of those lower energies and keeping you from becoming and acting and embodying as what we'll call your supercharged self. Okay. And that's the version of you who's in your power and who's pretty much unstoppable and can accomplish your biggest goals with ease. When you have a test, you get to decide which self you're moving towards. You get to decide if you're going to commit to, in that moment, moving towards your lower self or moving towards your supercharged self. Okay. And with some practice or some heightened awareness, even listening to this is going to increase your awareness right now. With some heightened awareness, you'll start to smile when you sniff out a test. Now, sometimes these tests are hidden. Sometimes they're not as blatantly obvious as maybe even the example that I gave you. But you're going to start to be able to sniff out these tests and pass them with flying colors. And when you see something as a test and look at it that way, passing the test becomes so much clearer and easier because you compare, okay, you can make one decision. Is that moving you towards your supercharged self or your lower self? Which energy field is that decision moving you towards? Okay. So like I mentioned, these tests are actually a great thing. And if you fail, it's not the end of the world either. Right? If you fail the test, you just get to loop back around and have a chance to pass it again. Okay. Because if you're truly committed, eventually you figure out the lessons, you pass the test, you move on to the next level. Rinse and repeat, like we talk about in the Prime Protocol. So let me give you one more example. It's a little more of a pop quiz. Okay, this is more of a spur of the moment type of test. So if you remember back from school, if you had pop quizzes, which I used to hate, I had some pop quizzes that I literally would get zeros on. I remember one time, the dumbest thing, we had a pop quiz. We had to read a chapter in a book that I didn't read. And then the pop quiz was about the intersection. It was one question. I had no idea. And I got a big fat 0 on the test, right? But it was a pop quiz. Those are the ones where they don't give you a heads up for, right? So typically they happen faster. They happen in more of the spur of the moment. So let's say, give you an example here. Let's say you started dating someone and you really like that person. Let's say you've been dating him or her for a few months now and you really see a future with this person. You guys are exclusive at this point. Everything seems so good, almost to the point where it's too good to be true. Then one night, you're out catching up with a friend at a restaurant. You guys are catching up, you're sitting at the bar, and a certain type of guy or girl happens to sit down next to you. It's exactly the type of guy or girl who you find really, really attractive and can't help wanting to talk to. Before you know it, the three of you are talking, and you can tell that this guy or girl is really into you. You're in the moment, your guard is down, and here comes the test. Here comes the pop quiz. The guy or girl leans in to kiss you at just the right time. Now, at this point, looking at things from an energy, identity, and behavior standpoint, unless you clearly close things off at that moment and tell the guy or girl to leave you alone, you failed the test. Even if it's a quick kiss, you exchange numbers, you tell them that you're with someone, you never see them again, you've still failed the test. How come? Because you've broken a commitment that you made to your new relationship. And on a subconscious level, you know that you've broken the commitment. And the residue of you breaking the commitment, if you suppress that or ignore that, often comes up in a lot of these lower energy emotions, guilt, shame, regrets, anger, all these different things, and a cycle of sabotage typically kicks in that relationship at that point. Situations like the one I described above are usually just the start of a slippery slope. Now, these come about. Okay, this doesn't just happen by accident. It's not random, right? These come about typically when your subconscious values and your subconscious intentions don't quite match your conscious values and your conscious intentions. So in the example that I just gave you, maybe you subconsciously, on a deep subconscious level, you may not even know it, weren't feeling worthy of your new relationship. Okay? And your lower self picked up on that, and lo and behold, set up that situation, set up that pop quiz for you. Now, when we understand what's happening on a subconscious level, and we install intentional values and beliefs that serve us more in experiencing more of what we want, when that starts to happen, that's when the lower self starts to lose any grip it once had, and tests happen more rarely, and they become easier and easier to pass. It's something that can be done using NQA. So if you can spot a test and pass it in the moment, celebrate that. It means you're one step closer to hitting the goal you decided on. And hitting goals, achievement, experiencing more of what you want, that starts to lead to what we call experiencing your supercharged life and you showing up on a regular basis, effortlessly, automatically, as your supercharged self. If that's something you'd like to know more about, go to yousupercharged.com/info to grab your guide titled The Best Kept Secret to Getting What You Want and Becoming Unstoppable Without Burning Out or Selling Your Soul. That's yousupercharged.com/info. Grab the guide. Take a look at your free copy. This is something that needs to be talked about more. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, share it, subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon.